The chalice gleamed gold beneath the chandelier's glow, filled with wine dark as midnight blood. King Petruchio Haval lifted it toward his lips, unaware that death waited within that crimson liquid. But across the crowded hall, a young woman in servant's red saw what no one else could see, the truth written in the queen's eyes, the tremor in her perfectly manicured hand, the way she watched her husband like a predator watches prey. And Cynthia Vivius knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had seconds to save a king's life. The grand hall blazed with celebration. Golden candles cast dancing shadows across tapestries depicting the Havel dynasty's greatest victories. Lords and ladies in silk and velvet raised their own goblets, toasting another treaty secured, another alliance forged. The Alpha King stood at the center of it all, tall and powerful, his long black hair falling past broad shoulders, his muscular frame commanding the room without effort. Beside him, Queen Radonia smiled with practiced elegance, the picture of royal grace. Among the servants moving like whispers through the crowd stood Cynthia Vivius. Her white hair, so unusual in this kingdom of dark-haired nobles, caught the candlelight as she moved between tables. The red servant's dress she wore marked her station, but those who knew her saw something more. Kindness lived in her eyes. Gentleness shaped her movements. She served not just with duty but with genuine care for every person she encountered, from the lowest stable hand to the highest lord. Yet tonight, that gentle heart carried a terrible weight. Hours earlier, while collecting dishes from the royal wing's stone corridors, Cynthia had heard voices behind a half-open door. Low, urgent, forbidden. She should have walked away, should have pretended deafness, but something in those whispered tones froze her steps, made her listen, made her witness the impossible. Queen Radonia's voice, breathless with passion, and answering her, deeper, masculine, familiar in a way that made Cynthia's stomach twist. D'Italian Haval, the king's own brother. Hidden in the corridor's shadows, pressed against cold stone, Cynthia heard them speak of love, of longing, of years spent pretending, hiding, burning with desire while duty chained them to separate lives. But it was not romance that made Cynthia's blood run cold. It was what came next. The plan. Tonight's celebration would be Petruchio's last. The wine in his ceremonial chalice, prepared specially for the king's toast, carried poison swift and certain. Within hours, the great Alpha King would be dead. His death would seem natural, a tragic loss, and in the grief that followed, who would question when his grieving widow sought comfort in his brother's arms? Who would protest when D'Italian, as closest male heir, assumed the throne? Who would object when, after a respectful mourning period, the new king married his predecessor's widow, uniting their claim to power? It was perfect. It was monstrous. And Cynthia was the only person who knew. She could have stayed silent. Should have, by every measure of self-preservation. A servant girl accusing the queen herself? It was madness. It was suicide. No one would believe her. She would be punished, perhaps executed, for such slander against the crown. The wise choice was to forget what she had heard, to close her ears and her heart, and let fate unfold as the powerful had decreed. But Cynthia Vivius had never been particularly wise about protecting herself, not when others needed protecting more. So when King Petruchio Haval raised that gleaming chalice to his lips, when the entire hall held its breath for the ceremonial toast, when Queen Radonia's smile turned sharp with anticipation, Cynthia moved. She did not think, did not plan, did not consider consequences. She simply ran. Her feet carried her across the polished marble floor. Nobles gasped and stepped back as the white-haired servant girl in red rushed past them. Guards reached for their swords, uncertain whether to stop her or protect the king from this sudden intrusion. But Cynthia's voice rang out before any could act, clear and desperate, and impossible to ignore. "Majesty, do not drink." The hall fell silent. Every conversation died. Every eye turned toward this girl who dared interrupt the Alpha King's toast. Queen Redonia's face drained of color, her perfect composure cracking like fine porcelain. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube, extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. Petruchio Haval, who had already begun to tilt the chalice, stopped. His dark eyes, fierce and intelligent beneath heavy brows, fixed on Cynthia. He had noticed her before, of course. A king notices everyone in his household. He knew her as the kind one, the gentle servant who brought extra blankets to cold guards, who remembered the names of every child in the nearby village, who never asked for recognition or reward. But he had never heard fear in her voice before. He lowered the chalice slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving Cynthia's pale face. Why? His voice carried authority that made lesser men tremble, but curiosity tempered it now. Not anger. Not yet. Cynthia trembled, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes upon her, of the weight of what she was about to claim. But she had come too far to retreat now. "The wine, Your Majesty. It is poisoned." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled nobles. Murmurs erupted. Accusations flew. Some demanded the servant girl be seized for spreading such lies. Others backed away from the king, suddenly fearful. But Petruchio Haval's expression remained unreadable, carved from stone and shadow. He had suspected something for weeks now. His wife's coldness had grown more pronounced. Her excuses for avoiding his bed more creative. The way she looked at him sometimes, as if calculating, measuring, waiting. He had dismissed it as marital discord, the natural cooling of passion after years together. But now, holding this chalice, watching Redonia's face lose all color, watching his brother D'Italian shift uncomfortably at the back of the hall, pieces began to fall into terrible place. The king breathed deeply, then smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Indeed, I find myself not thirsty after all." He turned to his queen, extending the chalice toward her with mock courtesy. "My dear wife, perhaps you would care to toast in my stead. You have always appreciated fine wine more than I." Redonia's hand shook as she stared at the goblet. I have already drunk my fill, husband. I would not want to appear immoderate before our guests." "Nonsense." Petruchio's voice remained pleasant, but something cold and terrible lurked beneath the warmth. "One more toast, for prosperity, for health." He paused. "For loyalty." The queen stood frozen, a beautiful statue of guilt and fear. She reached for the chalice with trembling fingers, but as the golden cup neared her lips, her composure shattered completely. She stumbled backward, pressing one hand to her chest. "I cannot. I feel unwell. The heat, the crowd. I must retire." She fled before anyone could stop her, her silk gown rustling like desperate wings as she ran from the hall. The celebration dissolved into chaos. Nobles whispered frantically. Guards looked to their king for orders, and Petruchio Haval stood at the center of it all, the untouched chalice still in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Search the queen's chambers," he commanded quietly. "Thoroughly." They found it within the hour. A small glass vial hidden in an ornate jewelry box, still containing residue of the same poison that chemists would identify in the Chalice's wine. Enough evidence to condemn a queen. Enough proof to destroy a marriage. Enough truth to break a king's heart. Rodonia was arrested that night, stripped of her crown and title, locked in the castle's deepest cell under guard. The marriage was dissolved by royal decree, the ceremony of dissolution performed with cold efficiency. Treason and attempted murder of the sovereign. The charges were clear. The punishment, under law, was death. But Petruchio delayed the execution. Something still nagged at him. Some piece of the puzzle remained missing. His wife had never been bold enough for this alone. Someone had helped her. Someone had given her courage and motive. And Petruchio Haval, who had built his reputation on strategic thinking and ruthless intelligence, would not rest until he knew the full truth. It was Cynthia who provided it. She requested a private audience the next day, and though his advisors protested granting such access to a mere servant, Petruchio agreed. She had saved his life, after all. She deserved to be heard. They met in his private study, a room lined with maps and books, where morning light streamed through tall windows. Petruchio sat behind his desk, still dressed in black, his long hair tied back, his bearded face grave. Cynthia stood before him in her simple red dress, hands clasped, white hair falling around her shoulders like snow. "Tell me how you knew," he said without preamble. So she did. She told him about the conversation she had overheard, about the voices in the corridor, about the Queen and D'Italian speaking not just of murder, but of love, of passion that had burned for years in secret, of plans that extended beyond mere survival into ambition and desire. She told him about the kingdom they planned to rule together, the power they would share, the future they envisioned built on his death. With each word, Petruchio's face grew harder. His hands, resting on the desk, clenched into fists. His brother. His own blood. The man he had trusted above all others. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade could reach. When Cynthia finished, silence filled the room. She stood there, afraid she had said too much, revealed too much, hurt him beyond bearing with her honesty. But when Petruchio finally looked up, his eyes held not anger toward her, but something else entirely. Gratitude. Deep and genuine and overwhelming. "You saved more than my life," he said quietly. "You saved my kingdom from falling into the hands of those who would corrupt it. You gave me truth when everyone else offered only lies and secrets." He stood, moving around the desk to stand before her. Up close, he was even more imposing. Tall and broad, muscled from years of combat training, radiating power and danger. He could kill her with his bare hands if he wished, could order her execution with a word. But when he looked at her, Cynthia saw only exhaustion and pain, and something like wonder. "Why did you risk yourself for me?" The question caught her off guard. She had not really thought about it, had acted on instinct and conscience rather than calculation. But facing him now, seeing the vulnerability beneath his fierce exterior, she found her answer. "Because it was right. Because you are a good king. Because the people need you." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Because everyone deserves someone who will stand for them when darkness comes." Something shifted in Petruchio's expression. Some wall began to crack. He had lived so long surrounded by ambition and politics, by people who wanted something from him, who saw only his crown and power. But this girl, this simple servant in her red dress, had asked for nothing, had risked everything, had stood alone against forces that would destroy her without hesitation, all because she believed he deserved to live. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried weight beyond their simplicity. Cynthia bowed and left, thinking that would be the end of it. She had done her duty, had saved the king. Now she would return to her quiet life, carrying this secret in her heart, grateful to have made a difference, however briefly. But Petruchio Haval was not finished. That night, he rode north alone. His advisors begged him to send soldiers, to let his guard captain handle the pursuit. But this was personal. This was blood. This required his own hands. He found D'Italian 3 days later, attempting to cross the northern border into Allied territory where extradition would be difficult. His brother, who looked so much like him but lacked the scars and hardness that kingship had carved into Petruchio's features, tried to flee, tried to fight. But the Alpha King had not earned his title through politics alone. The battle was brief and brutal. Petruchio defeated his brother without killing him, which was perhaps crueler than a clean death would have been. He bound D'Italian in chains and dragged him back to the capital, back to the castle where their betrayal had been born. D'Italian was thrown into the cell directly across from Radonia's, close enough to see each other, close enough to speak, close enough to be eternally reminded of their failed ambition and the love that had driven them to murder. The guards reported that the former queen and the king's brother spent their days in silence now, unable to face what they had become, unable to find comfort even in each other's proximity. Petruchio ordered them kept alive. Death would be mercy. He wanted them to live with their failure, to contemplate their treason, to understand the cost of their choices. Some in the court whispered that the king was too soft, that traitors deserved execution. Others understood. This was not mercy. This was justice of a different kind. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom slowly recovered from the shock. A new normal emerged, though shadows lingered. And through it all, Petruchio found himself thinking often of the white-haired servant girl who had changed everything. He began to notice her around the castle. Really notice her, not just as part of the background, but as a person. He watched how she interacted with others, how the guards smiled when she brought them food, how the children from the village ran to her when she appeared at the gates with small gifts, how she never raised her voice or demanded attention, but somehow made everyone around her feel valued and seen. She was kindness made manifest, goodness without pretension. And Petruchio, who had lived so long in a world of masks and manipulation, found himself drawn to her authenticity like a moth to flame. He started requesting her presence for small things. Could she attend him during breakfast to ensure the servants were properly trained? Could she advise on improvements to the staff's living quarters? Could she walk with him through the gardens and offer her thoughts on the kingdom's charitable programs? His advisors thought he was losing his mind, elevating a servant girl to such prominence. But Petruchio dismissed their concerns. He was the Alpha King. He would consult with whom he pleased. And Cynthia, for her part, accepted each invitation with quiet grace. She never presumed upon his attention, never asked for favors or tried to leverage her new position. She simply spoke honestly when asked, disagreed when she thought him wrong, and offered insights that came from living close to the ground, understanding the needs of common people in ways his noble advisors never could. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, about the loneliness of kingship, about the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives, about the fear that he might fail his people, might prove unworthy of the crown his father had left him. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, about the loneliness of kingship, about the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives, about the fear that he might fail his people, might prove unworthy of the crown his father had left him. They sat in the garden one evening, autumn painting the world in shades of amber and crimson. The air smelled of wood smoke and dying roses. Petruchio found himself speaking of his father, something he rarely did. He was hard, Petruchio said, his voice distant with memory. Kind in his way, but he believed that kings could not afford softness. That to rule was to stand alone, to trust no one completely, to see every relationship as potential betrayal. He laughed bitterly. He was right, it turned out. My wife, my brother, the people closest to me. No, Cynthia said gently. He was wrong. Your wife and brother betrayed you because they were selfish, not because closeness inevitably leads to betrayal. There are people worth trusting. People who will stand with you not for what you can give them, but because they care about who you are. Petruchio turned to look at her, this woman in her simple red dress, white hair catching the fading sunlight. How do you know? How can you be so certain when the world has shown you otherwise? Cynthia smiled sadly. Because I have seen it. The guards who protect each other in battle. The mothers who sacrifice everything for their children. The friends who share their last bread when both are starving. Love exists, Your Majesty. Real love. Not the twisted thing your wife and brother called by that name, but genuine care for another's welfare above your own. She met his eyes. You deserve that kind of love. You deserve someone who sees you not as a crown to claim, but as a person to cherish. Something in Petruchio's chest tightened. And do you think such a person exists for someone like me? A king with blood on his hands and enemies at his borders and responsibilities that consume every waking moment? I think, Cynthia said carefully, that such a person would not see those things as obstacles. They would see a man who carries heavy burdens and think, let me help bear that weight. They would see someone who has sacrificed much and think, let me give something back. They would see you, Petruchio. Not King Petruchio Haval, just you. The way she said his name, without title or formality, made his breath catch. No one had spoken to him that way in years, as if he were simply a man, simply human. You see me? He said. It was not a question. I do, Cynthia confirmed. I see a man who is fierce when he needs to be, but gentle when he can be, who makes hard decisions and loses sleep over them, who wants to do right by his people but fears he might fail them, who has been hurt and betrayed but still hopes, somewhere deep down, that the world might offer something better. She paused. I see you, Petruchio, and I think you are extraordinary. He stood abruptly, unable to sit still under the weight of her words, her honesty, her unflinching regard. He paced to the garden wall, staring out at the kingdom spreading below them. Lights were beginning to appear in windows as evening deepened. His people, going about their lives, trusting him to protect them, to lead them, to make choices that would keep them safe and prosperous. It was so much, too much, and he had been carrying it alone for so long. I am tired, he admitted, his back still to her. Tired of suspecting everyone, of measuring every word, of wondering who wants something from me, what angle they are working, what they hope to gain. He turned to face her. But with you, I do not feel that way. With you, I can simply be, and I do not understand why. What makes you different? Cynthia stood and walked to him slowly. She stopped an arm's length away, respecting the space even as she closed the distance. Perhaps because I do not want anything from you. I already have purpose in my work. I already have friends among the staff. I already have a life that satisfies me. Your favor would not improve my circumstances significantly. She smiled. So when I speak with you, it is not because I am angling for advantage. It is because I enjoy your company. Because I find you interesting and intelligent and surprisingly thoughtful when you let your guard down. You make me sound almost likable, Petruchio said with a hint of humor. You are likable, Cynthia assured him. When you allow yourself to be. When you stop performing the role of king and just exist as yourself. He reached out hesitantly, as if expecting her to pull away, and touched a strand of her white hair. It felt like silk between his fingers, cool and impossibly soft. You are remarkable, he said quietly. You know that, do you not? You saved my life. You asked nothing in return. And now you offer me something far more valuable than safety. You offer me yourself, your time, your honesty, your companionship. Is that what you want? Cynthia asked, her breath catching slightly at his proximity, at the intensity in his dark eyes. My companionship? I want, Petruchio said slowly, to know you better, to understand what shaped you into this person who sees the best in people when you have every reason to see the worst. I want to hear your thoughts on everything and nothing. I want to make you laugh. I want to see you smile. He cupped her face gently, his large hand cradling her cheek with surprising tenderness. I want things I have no right to want, things a king should not ask of a servant. Then ask me as a man, Cynthia whispered. Not as a king, just as Petruchio, who is tired of being alone. The permission in her words undid something in him. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of her. Roses and clean linen and something uniquely Cynthia. I am afraid, he admitted in a voice so low she barely heard it. Afraid that this is real, and I will destroy it somehow. Afraid that I am too damaged, too hard, too used to command and control to know how to simply love. You already know how, Cynthia said, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. You love your kingdom, your people. You love fiercely and protectively. You just need to learn to let someone love you back. Will you? The question was vulnerable, raw. Will you teach me, be patient with me, help me remember how to be more than just a king? Cynthia's answer was to rise on her toes and press a gentle kiss to his lips. It was brief, chaste, but it carried a promise. A beginning. When she pulled back, Petruchio's eyes were closed, his expression one of wonder. Yes, Cynthia said softly. I will. From that moment, everything shifted. They were still cautious in public, maintaining appropriate distance and formality. But in private, they began to build something beautiful. Petruchio showed Cynthia parts of the castle she had never seen. Secret passages his father had shown him as a boy. The royal library with its ancient books. The tower where he went to think, where the view encompassed the entire kingdom. And Cynthia showed him parts of life he had never experienced. She took him, disguised as a common merchant, into the village markets. Let him see how his people truly lived when they were not performing for royalty. They ate simple bread and cheese bought from street vendors, watched children play in the square, listened to the concerns of ordinary folk who had no idea they were speaking to their king. Petruchio was humbled and enlightened by these excursions. He had known, intellectually, that his policies affected real people, but seeing it firsthand, hearing their struggles and joys in their own words, made it visceral. Made it real in ways that reports and advisors' summaries never could. This is what governing should be, he told Cynthia after one such trip. Not from a throne room, making decisions based on parchment and theory, but here, among the people, understanding what they need. You cannot do this for every decision, Cynthia pointed out practically. You have a kingdom to run, enemies to deter, alliances to maintain. But you can remember what you saw. You can ask better questions. You can think of real faces when you make policies that will affect thousands. And he did. His next council meeting shocked his advisors when he rejected a proposal that would have increased tax revenue but damaged small farmers. I will not beggar my people to enrich my treasury, he said flatly. Find another way. The nobles grumbled but complied. And Cynthia, hearing about it later from a friend in the castle, smiled. He was learning, changing, becoming not a different person but a fuller version of himself. And Cynthia, for her part, was changing too. She had always been kind, but Petruchio challenged her to be strategic with that kindness. to think about systems and structures that could help more people than individual acts of charity, to use her insight into human nature not just to comfort, but to solve problems. "You have a gift," he told her one night as they walked the castle ramparts under stars like diamond dust. "You see people, really see them. You understand what motivates them, what frightens them, what they need. That is power, Cynthia. Real power. And if you chose to wield it, you could change this kingdom." "I am just a servant," she protested, though less strongly than she might have once. "You are so much more than that," Petruchio insisted. "You are a leader who does not yet realize her own strength. You are my conscience and my better self. You are the reason I want to be a better king." Such conversations, repeated over weeks and months, built intimacy beyond anything Petruchio had experienced with Radonia. His marriage to the former queen had been political from the start, a strategic alliance between noble houses. They had never truly known each other, had never shared vulnerabilities or dreams, had been strangers wearing the masks of husband and wife, playing roles rather than building partnership. But with Cynthia, Petruchio discovered what it meant to be truly known, to have someone understand his fears and accept them, to share his hopes and have them valued, to be imperfect and still be cherished. And Cynthia learned that love did not require her to diminish herself. Petruchio never asked her to be less than she was, never demanded she defer to him on matters where she had expertise. He valued her opinions, incorporated her insights, and treated her as an equal partner, even before she wore a crown. This was what love should be, they both realized. Not possession, not control, but partnership. Two whole people choosing to walk together, making each other stronger rather than diminishing each other. And Cynthia listened, not with awe or flattery, but with genuine understanding. She had known loneliness too, in different ways, had felt the weight of impossible choices, had questioned her own worth more times than she could count. "You are a good king," she told him one evening as they walked through the castle gardens. Autumn had begun to paint the leaves gold and crimson, and the air carried the sweet scent of dying flowers. "Not because you never make mistakes, but because you care when you do, because you seek to learn and grow, because you see your people as more than subjects to rule." Petruchio stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun caught in her white hair, making it glow like a halo. Her pale skin seemed luminous in the golden light, and her eyes, so steady and clear, held no guile or hidden agenda. Just truth. "How did you become this way?" he asked. "So certain of goodness in a world that punishes it?" Cynthia smiled, a little sad. "I am not certain at all. I am terrified most of the time, but I learned long ago that fear is no excuse for cruelty, that being powerless does not mean being worthless, that sometimes the smallest person can make the greatest difference if they simply refuse to look away from suffering." Something in Petruchio's chest cracked open. Some place he had kept locked and frozen since childhood, when his father had first taught him that kings cannot afford softness, that power requires hardness, that to rule is to stand alone. But looking at Cynthia, he wondered if that was really true, or if the greatest strength might actually be allowing himself to need someone, to trust someone, to let someone see the man beneath the crown. "I do not deserve you," he said quietly. Cynthia's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, I am just a servant. You could have anyone. I could have anyone who wants my power, my wealth, my position," he interrupted. "I could have 1,000 noblewomen who see only my crown. But you? You saw a man in danger and risked everything to save him. Not because of what he could give you, but because it was right." He stepped closer, and Cynthia's breath caught. She had never stood this near to him before, never felt the heat of his body, never been close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I am asking," Petruchio continued, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer contain. If you might consider allowing me to know you better, not as king to servant, but as man to woman, as two people who have both been alone too long. Cynthia should have been shocked, should have protested the impossibility of it. A king and a servant girl? It was madness. It violated every rule of rank and station. The court would never accept it. His advisors would rebel. The nobles would see it as an insult to their daughters and sisters. But none of that mattered when she looked into his eyes and saw not the fierce alpha king who made enemies tremble, but a lonely man who had lived too long without genuine connection, who had been betrayed by those closest to him, who had learned to trust no one and expect nothing but manipulation. She saw someone who needed kindness, who deserved love, who had earned the right to happiness after so much pain. I would like that, she whispered. And Petruchio Haval smiled. Not the predatory smile he showed his enemies, or the political smile he offered visiting dignitaries, but a real smile, warm and genuine, and almost boyish in its hope. From that evening forward, everything changed. They walked together each day, ate together when duties allowed, talked late into the night about everything and nothing. He showed her the man beneath the crown, the part of himself he had hidden for so long, the part that loved poetry and music, that worried about orphaned children and wounded soldiers, that sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of an entire kingdom resting on his shoulders. And with Cynthia, he could be that man, could set down the weight and simply exist, could laugh without calculation and speak without measuring every word for political impact. She, in turn, showed him the world through different eyes, took him in disguise to the villages surrounding the castle, where he saw firsthand how his policies affected ordinary people, introduced him to children who had lost parents in border skirmishes, to elderly couples struggling to survive harsh winters, to farmers whose crops failed and who faced starvation without aid. Petruchio had always been a just king, but Cynthia made him a compassionate one. She taught him that strength and gentleness were not opposites but complements, that true power lay not in dominating others, but in uplifting them. And gradually, inevitably, respect and admiration deepened into something more. Love grew between them like a garden carefully tended, not the wild, destructive passion that had driven Radonia and Italian to murder, but something steady and true, and built on genuine understanding. They knew each other's faults, and loved not despite them, but including them. They challenged each other to be better while accepting who they were in the present. The court noticed, of course. Whispers followed them everywhere. Some approved, seeing in Cynthia the kindness and integrity the kingdom needed. Others disapproved violently, considering it an offense that the king would lower himself to a servant when noble ladies waited eagerly for his attention. Petruchio ignored them all. He had spent his entire life worrying about what others thought, measuring his worth by their approval. But Cynthia had taught him a different measure. Value lay not in titles or bloodlines, but in character, in choices, in the courage to stand for truth even when it cost everything. And she had more of that courage than anyone he had ever known. 6 months after the night she saved his life, Petruchio made his decision. He called his advisors together and informed them of his intention to marry Cynthia Vivius. The announcement caused an uproar. Lords objected, ladies wept. Political alliances threatened to crumble over the insult of a servant girl elevated above their daughters. But Petruchio Haval had not asked for permission. He had informed them of his choice. And when they continued to protest, he reminded them exactly who ruled this kingdom. "I am your king," he said, his voice carrying the edge of danger that made strong men step back. "I have defended this realm in battle. I have negotiated treaties that brought prosperity. I have executed traitors and shown mercy to the repentant. I have given my life to this crown and this kingdom, and I will marry whom I choose." The room fell silent. Even his most vocal critics recognized that tone. The Alpha King had spoken. The discussion was over, but Petruchio was not finished. His expression softened as he continued, and those who knew him well saw something they had rarely witnessed: vulnerability. Loyalty, he said quietly, does not come from blood or breeding. It comes from character, from the choices we make when no one is watching, from the courage to stand for what is right, even when it costs us everything. He paused. Radonia was born to nobility, raised to be queen. She had every advantage of birth and education, and she chose treachery. My own brother, my blood, chose betrayal. He let that truth settle before continuing. But Cynthia Vivius, a servant girl with no title and no power, chose to risk her life to save mine. She asked for nothing in return, expected nothing. She simply saw danger and acted because it was right. If that is not the quality I want standing beside me on the throne, then I am a fool. And I have been called many things, but never a fool. The argument died that day. Some nobles remained displeased, but none dared voice their objections openly. The king had chosen. The matter was settled. And in the castle's deepest cells, Radonia and D'Italian heard the news and understood the final, cruelest irony of their failure. They had murdered and plotted for a crown that would now go to the very girl whose vigilance had destroyed them. The servant they had never noticed would wear the title they had killed for. She would have everything they had wanted, not through scheming or ambition, but through simple goodness. Justice, they learned, had a sense of poetry. Petruchio proposed to Cynthia in the same garden where they had first walked together. Evening light painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled of roses and approaching rain. And when he knelt before her, this powerful king who bowed to no one, Cynthia felt tears stream down her face. "I am not offering you an easy life," Petruchio said, holding a ring of white gold and sapphires. "Being queen is a burden few can bear. You will face criticism and jealousy. You will be judged more harshly than anyone else. You will carry responsibilities that will keep you awake at night. But I swear to you, I will face all of it by your side. I will protect you from every threat. I will be your champion and your shelter. I will give you my loyalty, my devotion, my whole heart, if you will have me." Cynthia knelt before him, taking his bearded face in her small hands. "I never wanted a crown. I never dreamed of power or position. I only wanted to help people, to make the world a little kinder. But with you," she smiled through her tears, "with you, I think I could do both. Together, we could build something beautiful." "Yes," Petruchio breathed, "together." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they stayed there kneeling in the garden as the first stars appeared overhead. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not perfection, not fantasy, but partnership, truth. Love built on foundations strong enough to weather any storm. The wedding was arranged for the spring, when flowers bloomed and the kingdom celebrated renewal after the dark winter of betrayal. Petruchio wanted time to prepare Cynthia, to ensure she understood what she was accepting, to give her every opportunity to change her mind if the weight proved too heavy. But Cynthia never wavered. She approached her new role with the same dedication she had brought to serving in the castle. She studied history and law, learned diplomacy and court protocol, met with representatives from every corner of the kingdom to understand their needs and concerns, and through it all, she remained herself. Kind, genuine, focused not on her own elevation, but on how she could serve others from this new position. The people loved her before she even wore the crown. Stories spread of her kindness, her humility, her genuine concern for even the lowest subjects. And when they heard how she had saved the king from poison, how she had risked everything to protect him, they embraced her as one of their own, who had risen through merit rather than birth. The nobility, seeing the people's approval and recognizing Petruchio's absolute determination, gradually accepted her as well. Some with genuine warmth, others with calculated pragmatism. It did not matter to Cynthia. She had never needed universal approval. She only needed to know she was doing right. And Petruchio? He discovered something he had never expected to feel. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated happiness in another person's presence. Cynthia made him laugh, made him think, challenged him to be better while accepting who he was. With her, he could be both the fierce king his enemies feared and the gentle man he had hidden away for so long. He was, to everyone's surprise, demonstratively affectionate with her in ways he had never been with Radania. In public, he remained appropriately formal, but those close to them saw how his eyes followed her, how he smiled when she entered a room, how he found excuses to touch her hand or stand near her. And in private, he was devoted almost to the point of worship. He brought her flowers from the garden, read her poetry by candlelight, asked about her day, and listened to every detail with genuine interest. He valued her opinions on kingdom matters and often implemented her suggestions. He defended her fiercely against any criticism, though she usually laughed and told him she could fight her own battles. But he could not help himself. After a lifetime of hardness and isolation, after believing he would never know genuine love, he had found it in the most unexpected place. And he would protect it, protect her, with every ounce of his considerable strength. Cynthia, for her part, marveled at this side of him that few ever witnessed. In council meetings or dealing with foreign ambassadors, Petruchio was every inch the Alpha King, commanding, intimidating, radiating power and authority. His voice could crack like thunder. His displeasure could make grown men tremble. He was fierce and uncompromising with those who threatened his kingdom or harmed his people. But with her, he was gentle, patient, tender in ways that made her heart ache. He held her like she was precious and fragile, though she was neither. He spoke to her with respect and genuine curiosity. He asked her thoughts and valued her answers. He made her feel not like a possession to be claimed, but a partner to be cherished. She loved both versions of him, the public king and the private man, the warrior and the poet, the fierce protector and the gentle lover. And she showed him that he did not have to choose between these aspects of himself. He could be complex, multifaceted, human. Winter passed into spring, and the kingdom prepared for a wedding unlike any in its history. Not a political alliance between noble houses, not a strategic merger of territories, but a celebration of love earned through loyalty and truth. The ceremony took place in the same grand hall where Cynthia had saved Petruchio's life, the same hall where poison had waited in a chalice and treachery had worn a crown. But now, golden sunlight streamed through the windows. Flowers decorated every surface, and the people who filled the space came not out of duty, but out of joy. Nobles stood shoulder to shoulder with common folk. Guards in their finest uniforms stood beside villagers in their best clothes. The entire kingdom had been invited, and it seemed the entire kingdom had come. When Cynthia entered, wearing a gown of white and silver that made her seem like moonlight made flesh, the hall fell silent. Her white hair had been arranged in an elaborate style, woven with tiny diamonds that caught the light. But her face remained the same, kind, genuine, slightly overwhelmed by the attention but smiling nonetheless. Petruchio stood at the altar, and when he saw her, his expression transformed. The fierce king disappeared entirely, replaced by a man so full of love and wonder that some in the audience found themselves wiping away tears. She walked toward him alone, having no father to give her away, but somehow that felt right. She had chosen this, had walked into danger to save him, had accepted his proposal knowing the cost. This journey was hers, and hers alone. When she reached him, Petruchio took her hands and spoke words he had written himself, abandoning the traditional ceremony in favor of something more personal. "I was lost," he said, his deep voice carrying through the silent hall. Before you found me. Not lost in direction, but in purpose, in connection. I ruled this kingdom but stood alone. I had power but no joy. I had a crown, but no heart. He paused, his dark eyes shining with emotion. You gave me back my heart. You showed me that strength and kindness are not enemies, that leadership means service, that being feared is nothing compared to being loved. You saved my life that night, Cynthia. But more than that, you saved me from a life lived in shadows and suspicion. You gave me hope. You gave me truth. And today, I give you everything I am. Cynthia's tears fell freely now, but she smiled through them. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but steady. I have never been brave, she said. I have been terrified every day of my life, afraid of doing wrong, of failing people who need me, of not being enough. She squeezed his hands. But you taught me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act despite it. You showed me that I am stronger than I believed, that my voice matters, that love can exist without manipulation or games. She smiled. You have given me a crown I never wanted. But more importantly, you have given me a partnership I never dared to dream of. And I promise you, I will stand beside you through every storm, will challenge you when you need challenging, and support you when you need support. Will love you not as a king, but as a man, today and always. The vows were sealed with a kiss that lasted just long enough to make the crowd cheer and the more conservative nobles blush. And when they turned to face the assembled kingdom, hand in hand, they were no longer king and servant. They were king and queen, partners, equals. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. The entire kingdom seemed to rejoice. There was music and dancing, feasts where nobles and commoners ate side by side. Petruchio's gift to his people was opening the castle grounds to all, allowing everyone to share in the happiness, regardless of station. And through it all, Cynthia moved with grace and warmth, making time for everyone. She danced with village children and elderly farmers, thanked the guards who had protected the castle, spoke with servants who had become her friends. She did not forget where she came from or who she had been. The crown did not change her essential nature. It merely gave her a larger platform from which to enact the kindness that had always defined her. Petruchio watched her work the crowd and felt his heart swell with pride and love. She was born for this, he realized, not because of bloodline or training, but because she genuinely cared, because she saw people not as subjects or resources, but as individuals worthy of respect and attention. In the castle's dungeons, the celebration's sounds filtered down faintly. Radonia and D'Italian heard the music, the laughter, the joy. They understood what it meant. The servant girl they had never noticed now wore the crown they had killed for. The king they had tried to murder had found happiness with someone genuine and good. Their plot had not just failed. It had been inverted entirely. Justice, they realized, was not always about punishment. Sometimes it was about this, watching goodness triumph while treachery rotted in the dark. The months that followed proved Cynthia's worth 1,000 times over. As queen, she implemented programs to help the poorest villages, established schools where children of all classes could learn, created shelters for the homeless, and systems to care for wounded soldiers. She worked tirelessly, using her new position not for luxury or power, but as a tool to help those who had no one else to fight for them. And Petruchio supported every initiative. He found himself ruling differently now, with Cynthia's influence shaping his decisions. He was still fierce when needed, still commanded respect and sometimes fear, but he also showed mercy more readily, listened to the needs of common people, considered the human cost of his policies rather than just strategic advantage. Together, they transformed the kingdom, not through conquest or wealth, but through compassion, combined with strength. They showed that a ruler could be both powerful and kind. That authority did not require cruelty. That the throne's purpose was not to elevate those who sat upon it, but to protect those who lived in its shadow. Their love, far from weakening them, made them both stronger. Petruchio found courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to grow. Cynthia found confidence to lead, to make difficult decisions, to stand firm against opposition when necessary. They were not perfect. They argued sometimes, disagreed on policies and approaches. But they worked through conflicts with honesty and respect, never losing sight of the partnership at their relationship's core. And their people saw this, saw that strength came not from domination, but from collaboration. That love was not weakness, but the greatest power of all. Years passed. The kingdom prospered. And in the grand hall where it had all begun, where poison had waited and a servant girl had changed fate's course, they held celebrations every year on the anniversary of that night, not to commemorate the attempted murder, but to remember that sometimes the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth, that courage exists in unexpected places, that goodness, real and unpretentious, will always triumph over ambition and greed. Petruchio Haval ruled for many more years, with Cynthia always beside him. They had children who inherited his strength and her kindness. They built a legacy not of conquest, but of compassion. And when people spoke of their reign in generations to come, they told the story of the servant girl who saved a king, and the king who was wise enough to recognize that she had saved far more than just his life. She had saved his soul, his capacity for joy, his ability to trust and love, and in return, he had given her a platform from which to change the world. It was not the fairy tale romance of legends. It was something better, something real, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, on seeing each other clearly, flaws and all, and choosing each other anyway, on the understanding that love is not about perfection, but about standing together through imperfection. And late at night, when the castle slept and they lay together in the quiet dark, Petruchio would sometimes run his fingers through Cynthia's white hair and whisper, "You saved me." And Cynthia would smile and whisper back, "You saved me too." Because that was the truth neither of them had fully understood until they found each other. They had both been drowning in different ways, both lost in loneliness and duty, both needing someone who would see them as they truly were and love them not, despite that truth, but because of it. The chalice that had almost killed Petruchio was preserved in the castle's treasury, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Sometimes Cynthia would look at it and marvel at the strangeness of fate. How one decision, one moment of courage, one choice to act rather than remain silent, had altered the course of not just her life, but an entire kingdom. She could have stayed quiet, could have convinced herself it was not her place to interfere, could have let fear win, but she had not, and that made all the difference. Petruchio often stood beside her during these moments, understanding her thoughts without words, and he would take her hand and squeeze gently, a reminder that she had been brave when it mattered most, that her courage had not gone unnoticed or unrewarded, that the universe sometimes recognized those who stood for truth and gave them more than they had ever dared to dream. They did not live happily ever after, in the sense that all their problems disappeared. Life continued with its challenges and hardships, but they faced everything together. And in that partnership, in that deep and abiding love built on foundations of respect and truth, they found something better than a fairy tale ending. They found home. The transformation in Petruchio was something the entire kingdom witnessed with amazement. Before Cynthia, he had been respected, but distant, a figure carved from stone and shadow, admired for his strength, but rarely loved. He made decisions with cold precision, won battles through superior strategy, ruled with an iron hand that knew little of gentleness. But Cynthia softened something in him. Not his strength, which remained formidable. Not his authority, which still commanded absolute respect. But the space around those qualities, the manner in which he wielded power, changed entirely. The guards noticed it first. The Alpha King, who had once walked past them without acknowledgement, now stopped to ask about their families, to inquire whether they had warm quarters during winter months, to ensure they received proper care when injured. He remembered names, listened to concerns, treated them not as tools to be used, but as men who sacrificed for the kingdom. The Queen's influence, the soldiers murmured to each other with affection and gratitude. And they were right. Cynthia had shown Petruchio that small kindnesses cost nothing, but meant everything. That a king who truly cared for his people needed to see them as individuals, not merely as subjects. The changes rippled outward through the entire kingdom. Laws were reformed to protect the vulnerable rather than simply punishing the guilty. Resources were allocated not just to military might but to schools and hospitals, and programs that lifted people from poverty. Trade agreements were negotiated with ethics in mind, refusing deals that enriched the kingdom while exploiting laborers elsewhere. Some nobles complained that the king had grown soft, that his marriage to a commoner had weakened his judgment. But those who observed closely understood the truth. Petruchio had not become soft. He had become complete. The warrior king had integrated the compassionate ruler, and together these aspects made him far more formidable than he had ever been alone. Because now, when he defended the kingdom, he did so not just for territory or pride, but for actual people he cared about. When he negotiated, he fought not for abstract advantage, but for the welfare of individuals who depended on his leadership. And his enemies, those who had once thought him merely dangerous, now found him terrifying. Because a man who fights for those he loves is infinitely more dangerous than one who fights for glory alone. Cynthia watched these changes with quiet joy. She had not sought to change him, had never demanded he become different. But her presence, her example, her gentle questions and observations had planted seeds that grew into transformation. And Petruchio, who had spent so long believing he had to be hard to be strong, discovered that allowing himself to feel, to connect, to care deeply, actually magnified his power rather than diminishing it. Their private moments together revealed depths of tenderness that would have shocked those who knew Petruchio only as the fierce Alpha King. In their chambers, when the day's duties finally released them, he became someone entirely different. He would brush Cynthia's long white hair with careful strokes, marveling at how the candlelight made it glow. He would read to her from books of poetry, his deep voice turning verses into music. He would trace the lines of her face with calloused fingers, made gentle by love, memorizing every detail as if she might disappear. "Sometimes I wake in the night," he confessed one evening, lying beside her in the darkness. "And I have to reach for you, to make certain you are real, that all of this is real." Cynthia turned to face him, her pale hand finding his bearded cheek. "I am here. I will always be here." "They tried to take you from me once," Petruchio said, his voice rough with old fear. Shortly after their engagement had been announced, there had been an attempt by disgruntled nobles to kidnap Cynthia, to use her as leverage against the king's reforms. The plot had failed spectacularly, and Petruchio's response had been swift and merciless. The conspirators now occupied cells in the same dungeon that held Radonia and Detalion, their screams of protest having earned them nothing but harsher conditions. The fury I felt that day. I would have burned the kingdom to ash to get you back. "But you did not have to," Cynthia reminded him gently. "Because you are not alone anymore. Your guards are loyal. Your people love you. And your queen," she smiled in the darkness, "can take care of herself better than you might think." It was true. Cynthia had proven surprisingly capable during the kidnapping attempt. While the nobles had expected a frightened girl easily controlled, they had discovered a woman who knew the castle's secret passages better than they did, who had allies among servants throughout the building, and who had absolutely no intention of being used as a pawn. By the time Petruchio's guards had arrived, Cynthia had already coordinated her own rescue with the help of kitchen staff, stable hands, and a few well-placed servants, who owed her kindness repaid in loyalty. Petruchio had been simultaneously terrified, furious, and absurdly proud. He had lectured her about taking risks. Then he had held her for hours, unable to let go, his powerful frame trembling with residual fear at how close he had come to losing her. And finally, he had laughed. Because of course his queen would rescue herself. Of course Cynthia would not wait passively for saving. She had never been passive in her life. Why would she start now? "You are extraordinary," he told her. Not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. "And I thank whatever gods exist that you were working in this castle that night, that you heard what you heard, that you chose to act, that you saved me in every way a person can be saved." Cynthia kissed him softly. "We saved each other. You gave me purpose beyond service, a way to help people on a scale I never imagined. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You saw value where I saw only ordinariness. There has never been anything ordinary about you," Petruchio said firmly. "From the first moment I truly saw you, I knew. You were light in a world that had grown too dark. You were hope when I had forgotten what hope felt like. You were everything I needed and did not know I was seeking." These conversations, intimate and honest in the quiet hours when the castle slept, built a foundation stronger than any political alliance could create. They were not king and queen in these moments. They were simply two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, who had chosen each other despite every obstacle, who had built something real and lasting from the ashes of betrayal and pain. The kingdom's prosperity under their joint rule became legendary. Neighboring realms sent ambassadors to study their methods, to understand how they had achieved such remarkable transformation. The answer was always the same, though many refused to believe its simplicity. They ruled with genuine care for their people's welfare. They listened. They acted on what they heard. They treated governance not as a right to be claimed, but as a responsibility to be honored. Cynthia continued her programs with tireless dedication. She personally visited villages throughout the kingdom, often traveling with minimal escort despite Petruchio's protests, wanting to see firsthand how people lived and what they needed. She spoke with farmers about crop rotation and irrigation, with weavers about trade opportunities, with teachers about curriculum and resources. She collected information, synthesized solutions, then brought proposals to the council that were practical because they were rooted in actual experience rather than abstract theory. The nobles learned to respect her input even when it challenged their interests, because Cynthia's arguments were always backed by evidence and presented with respect. She did not demand. She explained. She showed them the human cost of their policies and helped them find ways to profit without exploitation. She appealed to their better natures while also making clear that certain reforms would happen whether they approved or not, because she had the king's absolute support. And Petruchio did support her, publicly and privately, vocally and through action. When nobles tried to undermine her initiatives, he shut them down with barely leashed fury. When foreign dignitaries dismissed her as merely the king's wife, Petruchio made clear that she spoke with his full authority, and they would afford her the same respect they offered him or face consequences. He was, the court learned, even more dangerous when defending his queen than when defending his kingdom. Because Cynthia was not just his political partner. She was the person who made life worth living, the one who had given him back his capacity for joy. And heaven help anyone who threatened that. But for all his fierce protectiveness, Petruchio also knew when to step back and let Cynthia fight her own battles. She had asked him for this, had made him understand that she needed to establish her own authority, rather than always hiding behind his. So he watched from the shadows as she navigated court politics, intervening only when truly necessary, letting her win respect through her own merit and skill. And win it she did. Slowly but surely, Cynthia proved that her position was not just an accident of the king's affection. She was intelligent, capable, strategic when needed. She understood people in ways that years of noble education could not teach. And she used that understanding to build alliances, to forge compromises, to move the kingdom forward even when progress seemed impossible. The children born to Petruchio and Cynthia inherited the best of both parents. 3 strong, healthy children who grew up watching their parents rule with partnership and respect. The oldest, a daughter named Lyanna, had her father's dark coloring and her mother's gentle wisdom. The middle child, a son named Tiberius, had his mother's white hair and his father's fierce protective instincts. And the youngest, another daughter named Cassia, seemed to have taken the best features of both, with dark hair that held hints of silver and a personality that combined strength with compassion perfectly. Petruchio was a devoted father in ways that shocked nobles accustomed to royal children being raised primarily by servants and tutors. He trained his children personally in combat and strategy, took them on trips throughout the kingdom so they could see how their people lived, told them stories not just of glorious victories, but of hard decisions and painful lessons. He wanted them to understand that leadership meant service, that power carried responsibility, that being born to privilege meant owing a debt to those less fortunate. And Cynthia taught them empathy, took them with her to visit villages and orphanages, showed them how to listen with genuine interest, demonstrated through action that kindness was not weakness, but strength. She raised them to see servants as people deserving respect, to understand that their title made them not better but more accountable, to recognize that their greatest obligation was to use their advantages to help those who had none. The children adored both parents equally. They saw how Petruchio transformed around Cynthia, how the fierce king became gentle and playful with his wife. They watched their mother stand up to nobles and foreign dignitaries with quiet steel beneath her softness. And they learned that strength came in many forms, that love did not require one person to dominate another, that partnership meant both people standing tall together. Years passed with surprising swiftness. Seasons cycled. The kingdom grew and flourished. And through it all, Petruchio and Cynthia remained partners in every sense. They disagreed sometimes, argued occasionally, but always with respect and always working toward resolution. They never weaponized their relationship or used their children as leverage in disputes. They modeled healthy love for the entire kingdom, showing that marriage could be partnership rather than possession, that love could empower rather than diminish. In the dungeons far below, Radonia and Italian aged in their cells. They heard news of the kingdom's prosperity, of the royal children, of Cynthia's beloved programs, and Petruchio's just reign. Every piece of information was another knife in their hearts, another reminder of what they had lost through their own choices. Radonia had once been beautiful, but imprisonment had stripped that away. Her hair had gone gray. Her skin had lost its luster. The elegant queen was gone, replaced by a bitter woman who had nothing left but regret. She and Italian rarely spoke now. What was there to say? They had destroyed each other as thoroughly as they had destroyed their futures. The passion that had driven them to murder had curdled into resentment. Each blamed the other for their failure, for being caught, for not being clever enough or careful enough or bold enough. Love, it turned out, could not survive the weight of their guilt and failure. Sometimes, late at night when guards were scarce, they could hear celebrations from the castle above. Music and laughter filtering down through stone and steel. The sound of genuine joy, of people who had earned their happiness through truth, rather than trying to steal it through lies. And in those moments, Radonia and Italian understood the deepest truth of their punishment. They were not suffering because Petruchio was cruel. They were suffering because he was just. They lived, saw, and felt the consequences of their choices while the world they had tried to claim thrived without them. That was justice, not vengeance, simply truth made manifest. Above them, in the castle where light and life flourished, Cynthia and Petruchio continued building their legacy. They were not perfect. They made mistakes, faced challenges, dealt with crises and conflicts. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On the anniversary of the night Cynthia had saved Petruchio's life, they held a kingdom-wide celebration. The grand hall filled with people from every walk of life. Nobles in silk stood beside farmers in homespun. Merchants mixed with laborers. Children ran between tables, while elders sat in places of honor. And at the center of it all, Petruchio and Cynthia presided not from lofty thrones, but from seats only slightly elevated, accessible to anyone who wished to speak with them. During these celebrations, Petruchio would always raise a toast. The same toast, year after year. The people knew it by heart now, but they never tired of hearing it. To courage, he would say, his deep voice carrying through the hall. To the kind of courage that speaks truth when silence would be safer. To the courage that stands for right when standing costs everything. To the courage of one young woman who saved more than just a king's life. She saved his soul, his kingdom, his future. He would turn to Cynthia, his eyes shining with undimmed love. To my queen, my partner, my heart. The greatest blessing I have ever known. And Cynthia, who never quite grew comfortable with public praise despite years of it, would blush and smile and raise her own glass. To second chances, to finding light in dark places, to the understanding that we are all more than our circumstances, that anyone can change the world if they simply refuse to look away from suffering. She would look at Petruchio. And to love that sees clearly, that knows all our flaws and loves not despite them but including them. To partnership that makes both people stronger. The hall would erupt in cheers, glasses would clink, and the celebration would continue long into the night, filled with music and dancing and joy that was real because it was earned. Because this kingdom had learned what many never understand, that true happiness cannot be taken or stolen or seized. It can only be built through choice, through courage, through love freely given and gratefully received. The kingdom remembered their story for generations. Parents told their children about the white-haired servant who saved the king. Teachers used it as an example of courage and integrity. And every person who heard it understood the message at its core, that anyone can be a hero, that goodness has its own power, that love earned through truth will always prove stronger than love claimed through lies. And in the great hall where it all began, where a servant girl once ran forward to save a king from poison, celebrations continued for centuries. The people danced and feasted and raised their glasses in toast, not to power or conquest or political achievement, but to something far more precious, to loyalty, to courage, to love that transforms, to the understanding that the most powerful force in the world is not the sword or the crown. It is the human heart, when it chooses to act with integrity, despite all fear. That was the legacy of Petruchio and Cynthia, not a kingdom conquered, not wealth accumulated, but a truth proven. That goodness exists, that love can be trusted, that sometimes when we are brave enough to stand for what is right, the universe rewards us with more than we ever imagined possible. The servant girl became a queen. The lonely king found his heart. And together, they showed the world that the greatest stories are not about power claimed, but about love discovered. Not about thrones seized, but about hands joined. Not about ruling over others, but about standing together. And that truth, more than any law or decree or royal proclamation, changed everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.